Welcome back to the fourth installment in our performance vlog series. As you would have seen in the little highlights package of the training this week, we're just talking dominantly about our strength training sessions. I've had plenty of questions in the comments already asking, what are the types of things you do? Tell us more about your strength sessions. And I think it's something that's really important to talk about because it is something that a lot of athletes and a lot of coaches really want to engage in and get value out of. I'm going to talk about sort of some of the principles that I follow to build out a bit of a strength session and what my programming is sort of looking like at the moment. The one thing I will say with that though is I'm going to save the in-depth stuff, the sets and reps, exactly how I'm determining how much load to lift or weight to put on the bar if you want. I'm going to save that for our monthly review. You would have seen there was a bonus episode that went up this week and it's just for channel members only. So if you want access to those where I go through, do some more in-depth analysis, show you all the good stuff in training peaks, sets, reps, all of that, heart rate analysis of my running sessions and how I do that, you need to click the join button down below. For less than a coffee a month, you're going to get access to that, but also some extra discussion. I post up members only posts on our community page over on the channel as well. So you can get access to some extra little bonus bits along the way and some awesome great perks coming in the future that'll be accessed by members only. But otherwise, let's jump back into what we're talking about this week, which is our strength programming. So ultimately, in terms of the strength side of things, the overarching principle of my programming largely relies on improve some form of my performance when it comes to my sport side of things. Be able to build up some capacities through the tissues in my body, so whether it be tendons or muscles as well, to be able to handle the loads expected of me in my sport. I'm trying to supplement my actual performance. Strength by no means and the gym sessions by no means are the bulk of what I do. Yes, I have 3 sessions in the week at the moment, but those sessions last anywhere between sort of 30 to 40 minutes, and largely there's a lot of recovery in there as well. The volume's not actually that high. The point of that is to get a particular stimulus, try and improve the nervous system a bit, improve my coordination in a very controlled environment as a result of that increased nervous system function, be able to produce some more force, be able to produce that force more quickly. Very general adaptations that I can then transfer back over to my sport and express by going out and running or sprinting or changing direction. I can go out and do those activities, express that increased amount of force production, for example, in a much safer way without putting myself at increased risk of injury. I'm trying to minimize that risk. You can never prevent everything, but if we can minimize the risk, that's ideally what we're aiming for. So that's ultimately what the goal of the strength side of thing is, supplement the sport specific or the actual training and performance I'm trying to do. And that goes for any athlete. If you're an endurance athlete, strength shouldn't be dominating your week. It should be there as a supplement, but you need to get it right in terms of the programming to make sure that you actually get a benefit out of it rather than just going and doing another session that's going to be fatiguing, etc. And that's probably a key point I need to touch on is I very rarely come out of these gym sessions fatigued. Yes, they might be difficult and I might initially over a short period of time have a little bit of DOMS in the legs, but that's really easily rectified. We shouldn't be going in and doing the session to come out of it fatigued necessarily. We need to be targeting what we're aiming for to make sure we're improving some of those good qualities with a limitation of fatigue, because we want to be able to then go out and run, or we need to go out and ride the next day or maybe in that afternoon and execute that session. That's our core session that we're working towards. The strength is a supplement. So that's probably the initial goal that I want you to take away first in terms of how I think about strength programming initially. So in terms of the actual sessions, how do I go about it? Well, my sessions follow a very similar pattern. I'm going to run you through that step by step. Ultimately, I always start with some form of warm-up activity, maybe some mobilization or mobility. At the moment, that's largely been some hip mobilization. So having gone through a couple of lockdowns and just the nature of a lot of my work, particularly when I'm working at home from a desk, sitting down recording these videos, locking up through the hips a little bit is something that I just want to sort of free up. So you'll see me jump in. I might overlay some of the videos of what I'm talking about through this so you get an idea. But do some hip mobilization using a band just to get the hip moving. It also gives me a little bit of a stretch for the glute as well, so it helps me actually get into a better position for things like squatting, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But it just kind of frees the hips up, which ultimately then also flows back into my running, being able to get that full extension through the leg, to be able to get that solid leg drive and that propulsion I want to be able to move me forward a little bit quicker. After I've done a little bit of that mobilization type work, sometimes it might be a little bit of general warm up, maybe some skipping or some other type of stuff, get the heart rate up a little bit just to get warm and get moving. Maybe some foam rolling is sometimes a good option. Then I get into my main lift that I'm working on in that session. And what I mean by my main lift, it always revolves around some form of a lower body push or a lower body pull activity. What I mean by that is lower body push is something like a squat, whether that be back squat, front squat, split squat, Bulgarian split squat. Any of those variations, it doesn't really matter. Pick and choose based on what I'm trying to aim for at the time. At the moment, it's a back squat. Down the line, it's definitely going to change to more of a single leg variation. But then my lower body pull on my alternate strength day, so I have a particular focus of the day. So on strength set A, it might be more of a squat focus. On strength set B in the week, it might be more of a deadlift focus. I pick one of them. I don't do necessarily both on the same day. And I have that key lift set up. The lower body pull is more things like deadlift, RDLs, single leg RDLs or RFS type movements as well, where it's more focused glutes and hamstrings, whereas the squats is more quads, frontal. I do a couple of warm-up sets, and those warm-up sets are really light. So for me, back squat wise, it's just using the bar, just get myself moving again. It's an extension of that mobility and warm-up I did earlier. Same goes for the deadlifting. And then I get into my main sets where that's more focused on what am I trying to develop. Initially, it was trying to develop just some general volume in the gym, a little bit of just general strength and improving strength. Now it's starting to transition a little bit more to being able to express that a little bit more powerfully and starting to increase the intent that I move the bar with. So you'll start to see me move a bit more explosively, if you like. And really, those main sets have lots of rest periods in it. The point of that being is I'm going to get a really good quality handful of reps, have a good quality recovery, be able to repeat it, and then we're done. Majority of this beginning part of the session, and this almost takes up half the session, the warm up plus this main lift, is me sitting down, just playing on my phone, listening to some music, maybe listening to a podcast. I'm just sitting there recovering, because the point is we want a really targeted stimulus. And when we're talking about things like nervous system adaptation, or we're talking about a bit more anaerobic qualities like the power side of things, we need that good quality recovery to maximize the quality of each set and each rep ultimately. If we go in and we just rep out and do heaps and heaps and heaps, and this is one of my pet peeves when it comes to endurance athletes, is going in and doing 4 sets of 20 squats. And it's like, well, could I have been better off going out and just doing some running, or going on the bike and doing some cycling? That's going to give me a similar sort of muscular endurance effect, and actually a better muscular endurance effect, because it's far more specific. In the gym, we're looking at that more controlled environment, but we're looking at very specific stimulus for some of those different qualities we can't necessarily get by just going out and doing a long, slow run, for example, or any running, and sort of also balance a bit of fatigue too over a long run. Like I mentioned before, we don't want to come out of that session feeling absolutely destroyed. By doing high amounts of reps with low recovery, that's more metabolic. That's more like what we're going to experience outside. When I say outside, going out and doing your running sessions, for example, that's going to tend to lead to that more, when I say typical fatigue, you might still be fatigued after these gym sessions, but you don't necessarily want to be fatigued in a way that you can't walk the next day. That's not the point at all. And that's where the added recovery is going to aid that the prevention of some of that unnecessary fatigue. Once I get through that main set, now I start to incorporate some of my plyometric progressions, so to speak. So there's a bit of a continuum when it comes to plyometrics, and I'm going to cover it very quickly, but basically it's a process that you want to follow of ideally building a little bit of base level of strength in the first place. It doesn't have to be super high, but just some form of movement capacity and ability to tolerate load in the first place, building up through a couple of key phases. And those phases are called eccentric absorption, concentric production. Then we move into jump integration. Then we move in continuous jumps, and then we work on what we call the shock method. So these stages are just key sort of milestones or changes to how we go about our plyometric type work. A really good way of developing some capacities through the body to absorb and produce absorb load and produce force, and do that repeatedly, which ultimately is what sport is all about. When you run, that cycle, what we call the stretch shortening cycle, is happening all the time. Foot impacts, lands on the ground, absorbs the force. You then have to translate that into then producing a force to push off. So these activities, exercises from a plyometric side of things, largely are manipulating some factors and working on some of the components of that process to allow me to go out and run and sprint and change direction a little bit better with sort of better control, etc. And in a lot safer way as well. So in terms of the things I'm working on now, I'm right at the beginning stage doing some really low level type stuff, double leg and single leg drops, so high to low drops. Again, what we're talking about there is our eccentric absorption, learning how to tolerate or absorb the load, catch ourselves really safely and softly, but then also doing some like pogo hops, which is really low amplitude type plyometric, get some Achilles stiffness happening, make sure the ankles, and I'm actually progressing that now into some multi-directional pogo hops as well, so side to side, front and back, to really get the ankles to work in some different directions and absorb some of those little changes, work on different angles that the ankle lands at as well, is also going to help keep my ankles safe. All of these are going to be starting to incorporate, and I generally build some of these low-level plyometric activities into my recovery from my warm-up sets of that main lift. So for example, I go and do maybe a warm-up set of squats, back squats, have a little bit of a break, and then go over. I do my pogo hops, or maybe I do that sometimes with a skipping rope as well. It's just a little bit more interesting. Then I come back, I do my other warm-up set, do some more plyometric prep, and then I get into my main sets and I put the plyo stuff aside. So we want to do some of this plyo stuff when we're fresh at the beginning, doing it fresh when we start to progress that up to things like our concentric production, so things like box jumps or even hurdle jumps or continuous jumping, so doing like three hops in a row or 4 hops in a row for distance. This type of stuff that we add that's a little bit more high level, we need to be fresh when we do it because we want to get the maximal spring in our step, so to speak, when we do those activities, because that's going to give us the best return when it comes to transitioning to the performance side of things out on the field. So after I get through my main lifts, I've done a bit of my plyo prep at the beginning as well, then I start to get into what I call my accessory exercises. The importance of these is to develop tissue capacities in really key or high risk areas, so to speak. So hamstring, groin, calf, Achilles, all of those are my key high risk areas, as well as a little bit of shoulder health in terms of bouncing, which I'll get to the upper body component in a moment, because largely most of my stuff is going to be lower body dominant, given that I'm a runner and I don't need to absorb hits, so to speak. I'm not like a player where I'm tackling and things like that, so I don't need to be as well developed up top. It's largely lower body that I'm going to be focusing most of my time on. So this is where these accessory exercises are targeted around primarily lower body, but also some stabilization work as well. So you'll see in some of my programming, key things that I do are some hamstring based exercises. So the Nordics, the 3-second eccentric Nordics are a really good one for that. Developing the tendon capacity as well is really, really critical. Hamstring tendinopathy is a key one, or hamstring strain injury in general is a really key injury for high-speed running in things like Australian rules football. There's a lot of research to say that, doing some simple work on the hamstrings can be quite effective. Things like the Copenhagen's that I've put up and I might have actually talked about before in previous ones, those are more groin-focused. Really great exercise for developing the capacity through the groin as well. And there's a couple of variations there. Again, research-based in terms of they're one of the simple but effective exercises at helping to build some resilience to these types of injuries. A lot of calf work in terms of calf raise variations, isometric variations, traditional calf raises, bent leg, straight leg. All of these things are incorporated in, as well as some, when I say core stabilization, I tend to move away from that. I just think of it as stabilization in general, because a lot of the movements I try and incorporate in this part of section from a stabilization perspective are not your traditional just go and do a plank. It's maybe there's a plank, but there's a moving part as an addition to that. So you would have seen me do things like planks with a reach out the front. That forces my hips and through my torso to stay nice and stable while I have a moving component. So it really challenges me from a motor control and being able to control my body perspective, trying to do 2 things at once, hips stable and my arms moving. Things like a pile-off press as well, which is the banded one that you'll see me do. Keep the hips from some rotating in, and so I'm trying to keep that stable, so a bit of anti-rotation, but I've also got a moving part in terms of the arms are moving, because that's what I do out in the field. Anytime I need stabilization, something's locking down, so my hips tend to be the ones that are locking down, providing a really strong foundation, but then my arms and legs are moving around and off that, and I need to use that as leverage to get that movement happening in a much more effective way, or transition forces from my upper body to lower body and vice versa. That's how I sort of think about the stabilization aspect. And so I add in some of those exercises. I'm not going doing much here, a couple of sets of each, and I sort of work through it in more of a superset sort of format. It's not very metabolic. I'm not trying to go maximum reps per time. I'm being selective of how many reps I'm doing. I do add in some upper body variations. I keep it quite sort of minimal because, again, there's not as much focus. But the main things I'm doing is just trying to get relatively strong through my back and my shoulders. That's the key one in terms of the bouncing movement I go through. It's this really volatile, explosive action of throwing the ball down from over my head. I want to make sure that I've got enough resilience, enough strength, enough capacity to tolerate that through the shoulders, but I don't need to go crazy on getting really big in the upper body, because majority of my stuff is just running based. I don't necessarily have to produce that lots of times, maybe 10 or 12 times in a game would I bounce, plus some warm-up bounces in the breaks as well. And then also throughout the week when I'm practicing, it's not like I'm a swimmer, for example, where I really need big, strong lats to be able to pull through the water time and time again. So there's a little bit of emphasis there. There's not much, so that's why I tend to add in maybe 1-2 exercises that involve the upper body. Things like our inverted row, you see me pulling up on the bar, or even the pull-up variations, just trying to build some form of resilience and capacity in the upper body is just useful, and it's not going to hurt my overall program anyway. So as you can see throughout the entire, sort of process, I really follow a simple pattern. Key lift first, which is ultimately one of our big compound lifts. working down into some accessory exercises. They're a little bit more targeted, and ultimately that sort of flow, again, aids the minimization of fatigue too. So we start off with our really big complex stuff. Where do I need to be the freshest for? Where am I producing most amount of force? That's going to happen in my squat variation or my deadlift variation. Plus also I need to be as fresh as possible for that plyometric preparation. Then I move into my accessory exercises, really targeted stuff where they might induce some more specific and targeted fatigue, but it's only on the hamstring. It might only be on the shoulders, for example. And then I also add in some of that stabilization to the end. Again, total session ends up being sort of 35 to 40 minutes. It's not super long. It's a supplement to my program, but it's a really effective way of keeping me healthy and ready to go so I can go out and do those running sessions. So if you've got a bit out this week, a little bit of a different one, talking about that process. Again, if you want to gain access to the in-depth side of what these sessions are doing, make sure you consider clicking the join button down below, get access to the members only videos at the end of the month. I'll be going through in depth a bit more of the strength stuff, but also taking you through some of the stuff in terms of my conditioning training and how running's progressing, how to analyze those sessions from a heart rate and pace perspective as well. I'll still be posting these performance vlogs for everyone to see, but those bonus episodes at the end of the month are only going to be available to our channel members. So thanks to everyone who has been supporting the channel by joining up as a member or just clicking a subscribe button. Really do appreciate it, and all the comments and questions coming off the back of doing this performance vlog series have been really great to follow along as well. Thanks for watching this one today. Hopefully you got a little bit out of it, and we'll see you in the next one.